Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and you make me cream in my jeans.
All right. I was hoping for some terrible, working class British accent out of you there, but I'll take that too. Why not?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, there you go. So in this special 20th season, we are doing a sprawling retrospective of past years that we've covered and choosing different films from those years, each of us in our fun little draft episode. So we're here at I believe this is your second pick, right, Jason? The second film that you picked?
I'll take it.
Yeah. So Jason's second pick taking us back to 1977 for the documentary Punk in London. And Jason, how did you even hear of this film? Because it's not a well-known film.
Yeah, this might be our most obscure movie that we've ever covered, I'd say. So
maybe, I don't know, but it's close, if it's not the one.
Well, I love punk music, and I love The Clash. And I really love the documentary Punk Attitude by Don Letts. So my thought is maybe I was trying to look up other things, and I've seen like the Joe Strummer documentary, and I've seen a Clash documentary. So I'm thinking I probably just went down a wormhole on different things, punk related, and I came up upon this. Unless I was researching for our 77 season documentaries, and I just really got deep into the weeds there. So it was one of those two, but when I saw it, I was, I really resonate and love this music. So I just felt it was on my list for a while, and it's like, this is the perfect season to do it. You know what I mean? We're experimenting, we're trying new things, we're going all over the place. And this is this and Trees Lounge. My first two picks, real companions here.
Yeah, very, very different choices. But I like it. Yeah, I mean, why not get into some little obscurities? And the movie may be obscure, but certainly a lot of the music in this film is not. A lot of famous punk bands. This is a German documentary, although it is about British bands. It was directed by Wolfgang Büld, the German filmmaker who came to London in 1977 to film really the beginnings or close to the beginnings of the punk scene. I mean, we find out here like the Sex Pistols and the Clash have been very successful. And most of the bands, the Sex Pistols are not in the film, although we hear some of their music. Most of the bands here are not well known. And he clearly didn't have a lot of access to the better known bands, but that gives him the chance to talk to the sort of on the ground punks in London. As far as I could tell, this movie was not released in the US and possibly not even in the UK in its initial release. It was released in Germany, of course, and in Denmark, and those were the only theatrical release dates that I was able to find. And in the US, I don't know that it was available until decades later, possibly when it was released on DVD. The only reviews I found were from around that time period. So I think it's interesting, he captured sort of the beginnings of this really important scene, but I feel like a lot of people who might have been excited about that probably didn't see this movie until many, many years later.
Well, yeah. So, it opens with Anarchy in the UK, right? So, which is maybe the seminal anthem of British punk. You were saying he doesn't get a lot of big bands. There is a good focus on the Clash, and we'll get into that a little more. But also the Stranglers, he said, were the most popular band at this time, and he does have some good stuff with the Stranglers, especially where they say they hate Germany to the German filmmaker. So he did it. He had a nice mix of bands, and he had a nice mix of topics, and then he just kind of didn't dig deeper into any of the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, unlike you, this music is not my thing at all. I didn't like any of the music in this movie, and I had not heard of the Stranglers, actually. I've certainly heard of the Clash, and they're kind of like the climax of the film. They perform a number of songs, and he's got interview material with them. And the Stranglers, I don't think he gets a performance, right? He just has them tell him to fuck off, essentially, and that's what he gets out of them. But yeah, I mean, we also see the Jam, who are pretty well known, and the Boomtown Rats. I feel like those are the bands, the bigger, more successful bands that he does capture in this film. And never, you wonder if he attempted to get the Sex Pistols and they gave him an answer similar to what the guy from the Stranglers says, but he doesn't get it on camera.
Yeah, but they let him use the song, so it's interesting that they would be allowed to use the song but not do an interview with them. So the Stranglers, Josh, had 23 top 40 British UK singles, so that's pretty
Okay.
good. Always the Sun is probably the song that I think we might know best.
I'm not super familiar with them, but I would say almost every other week somebody picks out Stranglers at Wax Tracks.
Yeah. Well,
Nice.
maybe if I listened to that song, I would recognize it, but I certainly had not heard the name that I can recall. Some of the other bands in this film, the Adverts, X-Ray Specs, the Lurkers, the Jolt, the Electric Chairs, the Killjoys, Subway Sect, and other than X-Ray Specs, among those, I admit also I had not heard of any of those bands. So
I mean, that's kind of fun though. We obviously any movie we would watch, whatever it would be, any genre, we would all know like the major kind of players of that musical genre. So it's nice that we got a deeper dive into some of the lesser known bands, some of which I did know, and some of which I was not familiar with.
right, I feel like it would be nice if we had, as you said, actually gone into any depth about anything in this extremely poorly made film. I think is the problem.
I don't disagree. He just scratches the surface, and like he gets to like really interesting issues all the way through. Like when he's talking to like Miles Copeland about the press or about like touring and stuff like that, and like all of these are worthwhile subjects to dissect. But he'll just get like a clip and not explore it any further than the sound clip he gets. So.
And there's very little context to any of it. I mean, there's no on-screen titles about who these people are. Although most of the time, eventually, it's a kind of indicated who they are, but it takes a little while, and it's very disjointed. And yeah, it was. As someone who doesn't know a ton about this scene and wasn't particularly interested in it, this didn't draw me in and make me feel like I learned something valuable versus, say, watching like The Decline of Western Civilization, which I know we talked about when we talked about Penelope Spheris, which is just from a few years later about the LA punk scene. And again, full of bands that I'm not really keen on, didn't know a ton about. But that movie is fascinating because it's much more like it's a better made film.
Yeah, I think you look, I agree on all of this stuff. What it is, it feels like if they were like a German TV station was like, go do a TV special on what punk music is, and then make it palatable for everybody. So it's just like punk music, Britain. It's a movement. Here's a band. This is a thing they say. This is what they believe in. Here's another band. Here's their song, right? And it's like, oh, you're just scratching the surface, man. Like all that stuff of the origination of the movement was to kind of take the record industry in a new way. That would have been exciting to explore. Or when the movement started, it didn't matter what color you were, what you looked like. It was about inclusion and all these bands. It's 1977. Punk really started. This area we're talking about is 75, right? If we're going to go back to the late 60s and Iggy and the Stooges and MC5, we could do that. You could argue that the Kinks and the Who were forerunners of this, but this really starts in 75. And this movie, which, as we know, in 1977, a lot of these punks are already saying, the movement's dead. It's already too big. It's already been co-opted. These are all such interesting things to explore, right? And we don't get them. So the way in is through the performances, some really good ones, some not as good ones. But I don't disagree if I was like, hey, Josh, I think you'd really like punk music. Let me show you a movie about it. This would not be my choice.
Right. And it's weird because I get the impression, and I could be wrong about this, that Wolfgang Büld is not what you're describing, that he was really excited about this music. He made multiple documentaries about this scene and the general like underground music scene in Britain during this period, and didn't seem like he was just, as you said, sent as a work for hire or something, but yet he doesn't get into any really of what makes it special. So as I said, there's no, as far as I could discover, English language reviews contemporary to when it was released, but I did grab a couple reviews from later DVD releases. So in 2009, Chris Barsanti in Pop Matters said, as a filmmaker, Büld does little to edit his gangly documentary into much of a coherent shape. He prefers to stab in long passages of pulsating concert footage with these interminable interstitial interviews with those making the scene in the roiling cultural cauldron that was late 70s London. There's little rhythm to what's thrown up on screen, just a lot of lucky to be there scenery, occasionally interrupted by the director's German mumbling. But fortunately for the audience, what Büld was able to capture has the kind of electricity that doesn't make frequent appearances. There is an energy here specific to this particular cultural moment, the sense of being right on the hinge of something, which has rarely been captured on celluloid before.
I think that's accurate. And there are those interstitials are interesting because, and did you feel this way? Either of you guys? I'm like, how many of you guys like really believe what you're saying? And how many of you guys are putting on appearances to be a punk right now?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think Dave kind of said this on Letterboxd, is that these guys are all wankers, really.
No, not
all,
Joe Strummer. Don't you take the Clash out on this
yeah,
week,
I guess. But I mean, especially like there's the guy who, what is he? He's like a roadie for the Damned, I think it was.
No, he's a roadie for the Clash. His name's Rodent, and he lives upstairs. You're talking about the guy who lives upstairs in like the like kind of desolated burned out subway platform rehearsal space, right?
I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Some guy who was a roadie. I thought it was for the Damned, but I guess not.
Rodent.
But
yeah. Rodent, Josh. Rodent.
Okay. Sure. Is he like a famous roadie?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. So you made it
the movie doesn't
like
get into it.
You knew who he was already.
I mean, I didn't sleep with him in the 70s. I can't tell you. Oh, that would be a groupie. So yeah.
Yes. No, I just, he just seemed like he was a total idiot and was just saying anything. And there's the one guy, another German guy who's like a manager of a club, and he basically
the Marquee Club.
Right, and he's like, I don't care about punk music. I don't like punk music, but hey, it's popular. The kids like it, so we're booking it. And he was the only guy who really seemed like he had a handle on things.
But I'm okay with that. Like that would have been interesting to explore because we go to that other club at the beginning, and they're like, we didn't want to charge more money, and eventually we couldn't sustain the business, and like. That would have been another interesting avenue to explore. There's a whole thing about one of the bands is from Birmingham, and they're saying, if it comes from London, people just automatically say it's good. For us, it was a little harder to, make strides. That would have been interesting to explore. They're like, I'm like, every single story you could have told, I wanted to hear, but you didn't tell any of those stories.
Yeah, I will say, because this movie is so obscure, when we were getting ready for this episode, looking it up, if you look it up like on IMDb, it says that the running time is 111 minutes. But every version that I was able to find that is accessible for streaming and it's on a number of streaming platforms, on Amazon Prime, on free services like Tubi, and on library services like Hoopla, is 94 minutes. So there may be 17 extra minutes of footage, but I have a feeling that it's just more performances, that I don't think that it gets into any more detail. I did see somewhere, someone like a Clash fan site or something posting about this movie, and it said that in the extended version or whatever, the Clash performs 7 songs, which they definitely do not in the version that we watched. So I think it may just be that.
Can we just put that back in? I would have been really happy with that.
Yeah.
Clash is they're my second favorite band of all time. I don't know if you know that, but
I you know what? I didn't know the exact ranking, but that's good.
Yeah, it's number 2, Josh.
Yeah, I know what number 1 is.
I do too.
Mentioned it a number of times here.
There was a mutual admiration and love between Joe Strummer and Bruce Springsteen. So it's all good with me.
I'm glad we managed to get Springsteen into this documentary about 1970s British punks.
Well, you're saying it like a joke, but Josh, as the member of this podcast who has done a lot of reading and listened to the music and watched a lot of the movies, like this is akin to that. Like, I mean, there was a whole interview with Lou Reed in the 70s when, the New York scene was popping off, and they were like, what do you think of Bruce Springsteen? It was a punk magazine. It was like, he's one of us, man. It's the same thing. Just let him be, bro. So yeah, I can bring it in, Josh.
Okay, you clearly can. So a little bit later in 2011, Time Out, in an unbylined review, said, punk in London makes all the mistakes that visiting film crews with sociological briefs usually make, especially when they're headed by earnest young directors. It pretends that its superficial observations are in-depth analyses. it contents itself with interviewing peripheral figures because it can't get near the Naz. Büld doesn't help himself by worrying about the sound quality, and sometimes dubbing recorded versions of songs over images of the same song in performance to absurd effect. I definitely noticed that.
Well, Josh, I used to write for Time Out, so I don't feel like I'm able to comment on this.
Yeah, you're concerned about your conflict of interest here.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say I agree with everything that was said. So
Yeah, it was jarring at a few points to be like, this is clearly a studio recording. Like, there's no way this sound is coming out of this guy's mouth into that microphone in this
it's
moment.
kind of a bummer,
Yeah.
It's kind of a bummer. That's why, we can talk about the best musical performances, but I think, there are certain live performances that really crack, especially at the end of this movie, and you could tell.
Yeah. So there isn't a lot of info, but anything else you want to mention about the background here, Jason?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you for counting us off.
You mentioned the other punk movies. One was called Punk in England, and the other is Women in. Is it called Women in Punk? Or
it's called Women in Rock. I mean, there's a lot of different. Maybe we'll get to this a little more later. But there's part of the issue with all of these films is that it seems like they were kind of like repurposed and re-edited. So Punk in England is the title, like that, which is the follow-up documentary that he made in 1980. That's the title that you can find it under now if you're looking to watch it. But it was also originally released under the title Punk and its Aftershocks. And that other one is now called Women in Rock, but it's possible that it was called Women in Punk at one time. It's hard to say. So, maybe some, boutique Blu-ray label needs to give the full restoration to these films. I just don't know that anyone cares enough.
Let's go Vinegar Syndrome.
I could see that. Nice Wolfgang Büld punk music box set.
The fight between Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow is on for this.
So we'll come back and talk some more of our general thoughts on Punk in London. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our special retrospective season, we're back in 1977 for the documentary Punk in London, which is Jason's second pick. And Jason, as the person who picked this movie and the fan of this music, do you want to talk about what you think some of the highlights were?
There's one absolute highlight, which I alluded to, which is worth watching the whole movie for, although you could probably just YouTube the clip, but it's the live stuff of the Clash in Munich. And that is just, scorching off the screen. Joe Strummer in real high form there, and the Clash just kicking ass all over it. And, all those songs are from that first Clash album, which I love, which is The Clash. And then, you can see even in that performance that they're going so far away from the, 3-chord 1, 2, 3, 4. They're already influenced by reggae and other genres, and they're willing to experiment. And that to me was the highlight. I thought it was so much better than the earlier Clash stuff that they showed in the rehearsal studio, which I don't think captured the electricity of it. I'm big on environment. I think you could say that he did get a good feel for like what the streets and the scene were like at that point in time. So, that's really, those were my highlights, Josh, so.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
See you next week, guys. Thanks, Josh.
No, I don't, it was frustrating to me because like I said, I really do like The Decline of Western Civilization. I'll just continue to recommend watching that instead. But I was hoping for, at least I think early on, it's clear like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing with the people that he's interviewing. But at least maybe you're going to get some exciting performances. And to me, the performances were almost all just so underwhelming. And it's partly that I don't care for the music, but I feel like also there was just a lack of energy. I mean, certainly in the performances where you can clearly tell that it's dubbed over with a recording. I mean, that's obvious. But even in a lot of the other performances, I just didn't feel the excitement that I think you're meant to feel, or that the people feel, the bands and the audiences feel during this period. And I don't know, I guess I'm not as familiar with The Clash as I thought, because I definitely did not even realize that was them until like the very end of their performance, because I didn't recognize any of those songs and I didn't recognize what Joe Strummer looks like. And there's no on-screen titles anywhere for any of these people. And, if they didn't play Rock the Casbah or Should I Stay or Should I Go, I didn't know who they were.
Which is from 1983. So now you're really pushing forward in the Clash chronology. But did you not feel that last performance, that Munich performance, was like kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the performances in this thing?
I really didn't. That didn't do anything for me. If I had to pick like my highlight, it would be the X-Ray Specs performance, which I don't care for that music, but the energy there was really there, I think, in their performance, more so than in the other ones.
Well, I know Dave liked the X-Ray Specs stuff, but Dave, jump in and save me on the Clash here, because I'm clashing with Josh over the Clash right now.
Well, I got to admit, I also didn't realize it was them until later in the film. So, but they were great though. And I also, X-Ray Specs was the first one I wrote down. I mean, I think they're probably the big, standout here. I also really like the adverts, One Chord Wonders, the song that they did. I like that a lot too. And then, Jason was talking about the environment. I'm currently, you guys know I don't read, but I'm listening to an audiobook of,
well, that's close enough.
Yeah.
That's more than that's happened before.
Surprising.
In 2025, that's reading.
Yeah, there you go. Curepedia. It's the A to Z of the Cure. And
you're listening to somebody read you an encyclopedia. That's awesome.
Exactly. But they talk a lot about like the early days of the Cure and all of the shows that they were like hanging out at and meeting, their band members. And obviously they're a big part of the, the post-punk. And a lot of these venues and stuff were exactly where they're saying they were all hanging out. So it was kind of fun that I'm hearing this and then watching this, and it's like, oh, they're at that bar, and all these same venues that they're talking about in that.
Yeah, but again, I feel like that theoretically is cool and interesting, but I didn't really get a sense of almost any of that. A lot of it too is like, I feel like the way, I don't know if they didn't have the budget or the time to shoot enough B-roll or whatever, but a lot of this is like, here, we're in a room. Okay, where is this room? Like, how did we get here? And there's not as much environment to give you a sense of like, okay, is this a district in the city, right? Are these clubs near each other? Do these people live in a certain area, et cetera? Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. There's one point where they're going to, I think it's the bassist of the Lurkers, the one they interview where he's sitting in the living room with his parents. And Büld says something like, the worst thing in England is to have, I'm now doing a French accent. I can't do the German accent, but anyway, he says something like, the worst thing is to like not have your own front door or whatever. This very like weirdly condescending way to describe the fact that they live in a housing project, which I'm sure exists in Germany. But, even that I was like, okay, either try to explore the socioeconomic status of these people as you're mentioning, or shut up because you clearly don't know what you're talking about. And so that was a bit frustrating too.
Do you think had he listened to an audiobook about The Cure, it would have been a better film?
Yeah, but maybe we could just put the audiobook for The Cure as the narration of this film instead. So was there, Jason, did you have a favorite interview? One that you actually thought was insightful or at least entertaining?
I mean, the most insightful one was probably the one with Miles Copeland from Sniff and Glue, the magazine, and kind of talking about how, why he moved over from doing like kind of managing more traditional rock bands to punk, and how he kind of resonated with the movement, the politics, and the youthful energy, and the idea of like, again, here's something he's like, he mentions a band, and he's like, and they had a hit single, and I set up this whole tour for them, but they couldn't do it because of their families. And I'm like, well, put an interview in with that guy. Like, I want to hear what his reasoning is.
Well, was that a punk band, or was that him saying that like,
no, he was saying like a more
old school band.
Yeah, a more, a more traditional rock band, which that was another interesting element of it was when you get to the Teddy Boys, which, Josh, you're a Teddy boy. So
yeah, I don't think I would qualify. I didn't know there was again, I spent so much time in this movie being like, what is this? And I just would have to keep looking things up online because it's like, you didn't explain anything here about who are these people and why are you talking to them?
Yeah, and you mentioned like, oh, it could have been budget. I don't think it's budget. I think it's poor planning and poor execution, but I could be wrong. Who knows? The Teddy Boys were a group of more traditional, rock fans who think that, punk is garbage and it's on its way out already and they should be fighting each other. And it's funny to me because they have like a real rockabilly look. And, that's where Joe Strummer came from, was the 101ers. His first band was a rockabilly type band. And he saw the Sex Pistols. He's like, nope, got to do something else. This is going to take over. And so it's interesting that like, I wonder if they're like, all these punks are terrible except Joe Strummer, or if they're like, that guy sold out. He's the worst now,
Yeah, I mean, they give those guys so much screen time. Like, and it's not as if they have a coherent worldview, right? It's not like he's talking to somebody who has thought this through, or some sort of intellectual, or a journalist, or someone who has critiques of punk music and the punk movement that are considered or whatever. It's just thugs, essentially. These guys are like, I don't know, we want to beat them up. And it's like, oh, okay, that's great. You're giving a platform to these guys who are like wanting to violently assault the subjects of your documentary. And there's no pushback. But there's a number of scenes where you hear Büld off screen asking some, as the review points out, some like mumbly, like confusing question or whatever. We don't hear him, I don't think, with the Teddy Boys. He just lets them talk. And so that, like, it's so many of these interviews are like, do some editing here. Dude, these people are rambling. And like, okay, fine. Maybe they're not all the most intelligent people, but you are a filmmaker. Like, cut it down here. Find the most interesting thing that they said, or, cross-cut some of these people, like contrast what this guy said with what this other person said. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's the issue. I don't mind that he gave him the time and the platform. I just don't think again, it's like, here's something on the surface, and he didn't, and this isn't just about this movie. I would say this about any documentary. For instance, I'll give you a great example, right? We covered Chris Smith, American Movie, which is one of my favorite documentaries of all time, right?
Yeah.
And he made 100-Foot Wave, 100-Foot Waves, which is, I think, maybe the best documentary show that I've seen ever, or one of them, which is about, big wave surfers going to Portugal and finding the biggest waves on Earth, right? So when he teamed up with Bill Simmons of The Ringer, who has made great sports documentaries and kind of and music, some good music documentaries, to do the Vince McMahon documentary, right? I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome, right? I'm a pro wrestling fan. This is, let's get some insight into this guy and everything. And it was exactly what you're talking about. He just let Vince McMahon steamroll him and never pushed back on any question. And I was like, this is such a waste of an opportunity. And this guy is such a better filmmaker than this. It really ruins a project when you just let your subject bowl you over like that.
Right. I mean, that's true. I feel like here, though, it's not even that he's bowled over.
He just doesn't do anything.
Right. He just doesn't know what to do with this. I mean, none of these guys, even the Teddy Boys, even as they are talking about beating people up, like, they're not intimidating. They're not people where you're like, oh my God, this is like, I'm in the presence of some sort of like larger than life figure. Even people like someone like Joe Strummer, who became super, super famous later on, is very unassuming in this film, to the point, right, where I wasn't sure, is this guy a big deal or not? And I think that's a positive. That's something that you want to be able to have in a documentary, to be able to get people unguarded. They're not, right. They're not trying to steer your movie in a particular direction, but the filmmaker needs to steer the movie in a direction, and he just does not do that, really.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing about the man thing. There was just no pushback. It wasn't that he was bowled over. But Josh, that goes back to the idea of, I do think you saw like Strummer, and it was an honest look. But I definitely felt like there were some kind of other people in there who were just like, yeah, we're punk. And it's like, well, why are you punk? And it's just like they were putting on appearances, like I said, as opposed to like really, being believing in what they were doing.
Right. And I mean, that is a critique that you get from, is it the guy from the Stranglers? Who is it? The guy, this is the context issue, that they're interviewing in like the back of a cab with a woman who I wasn't sure if she was his bandmate or his girlfriend or what. And he's talking all about how, like what you were saying before, the scene is over, and he's super, super jaded and saying, people are just doing this because it's the trend or whatever. And was that the guy from the Stranglers, or who was that?
I don't remember.
Okay, great. So, I mean, but I did want to also say that, going back to that context issue, that I think you can absolutely make a documentary where you just drop the audience in without context, and you don't have all of this, textual explanation or voiceover or whatever, and it really immerse the audience in whatever your subject is, and it can be really effective. But you have to be able to give them enough within what you're showing to have that, to draw them in. And also usually those are better if they're like experiential rather than like interview based and performance based or whatever. So I feel like you could have done that. And Penelope Spheres, I feel like, does some of that maybe with Decline and those movies where you're just like, here we are, and here's some people talking, and who are they and why are they talking? We'll figure it out eventually. But this movie doesn't know how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, should we give a good example of that type of documentary that you're talking about?
We should, if I could think of one right now.
I got one for you.
Yes.
It's the Ross brothers, Bill and Turner, made a documentary called 45365, which is the zip code of Sydney, Ohio, and it's just kind of like their verite look of their hometown and everything. And they just, like I said, drop you in and you follow these stories, and that's pretty much it. And it's fascinating. It's great.
Right. I haven't seen that. I've seen Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets, which is essentially a fiction film, does a similar kind of thing. And I think those guys are known for doing that sort of thing. And if I had prepared this, I'm sure I could have thought of other examples. It's absolutely a legitimate way to make your film. And he just does not.
Right. Nothing we're saying is really about how and nor would we ever tell anyone like, oh, this is how you should utilize your form. We're just saying whatever form this guy tried to utilize, he did not utilize it well. So,
right.
Which is a bummer. And I was thinking that on the live performances, it's so much static cam, and it's like, you're talking about you didn't feel the energy of it. And I think part of that is, there's nothing wrong with just like putting a camera on someone and letting them go. But like, it would have been nice to get some handheld stuff and some different angles and really just kind of feel, sweaty and up close with those performances. I think, and I think it was in the that Clash segment I was talking about in Police and Thieves, which is an amazing song. There's a part where Mick Jones has like a really cool guitar riff and they're just on the bass instead of the guitar. And it's like the completely wrong thing to do at that point in time. But, what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that theoretically, to give them the benefit of the doubt, could go to a budget issue if they didn't have the time, the preparation time, they didn't have enough equipment, or to be able to shoot. Because I think some of these are just performances in clubs, but some of them were put on specifically for the movie. But to be able to shoot like multiple performances, play the song over again, and so we can get different angles on it and things like that. If they just don't have the ability to do that, then they got to go with what they've got and trust that the performance itself is enough. And I think probably it is in a lot of the cases, but they're not even doing that when they're like dubbing over the recording, for example. Like, no, we didn't trust that this was enough. We had to change it, or we had to put in a recording, and who knows why was it.
And what a bummer, because like it takes away that live energy, the crowd energy. Like I want that. Like punk is not supposed to be polished, right? It's supposed to be dirty and
right,
just kind of on the ground like that. But yeah, I mean that's like we don't want to. I don't want to just keep beating this dude up. Like I still love the music. So
yeah, I mean, and I think that is the thing for me too, is that if you love the music, you could watch this and say, okay, this is a flawed movie. It's not a well-made movie, but look at these early bands that maybe don't get a lot of attention, or here's a performance from early in the career of the Clash or the Jam, and it's cool to see that. If I didn't like any of the music, there was really nothing else for me to hang on to here. So I did want to bring up another one of these larger sort of issues that is touched on and doesn't really get explored. But I thought it was interesting that it was touched on by multiple people. The Teddy Boys talk about this a lot. The idea that like they want to beat up the punks, not just because they don't like punk or whatever, but just essentially because they want people to beat up. And the idea that like young dudes need to be violent with each other, and we're not having a war right now, so it makes sense that we're just going to find people to be violent with. And at least one other person, I can't remember who it is, but I think more from the punk side, essentially says the same thing, like, hey, when there's no war, young dudes have to beat somebody up. Like, and this is sort of presented as this accepted obvious truth, and that just struck me as so horrific.
I think it's not true at all. I think there are multiple issues with that. One, like, women were a major part of the punk scene. So like, let's get that opinion as well. And two, as we said, the beginning of the punk movement was all about tolerance and letting everyone in. So that's something that evolved, right? And why did it evolve and how did it get there? We could have explored that. To me, I think the most interesting issue to explore would have been like, this is 1977. Obviously, maybe the biggest year for punk as far as like becoming mainstream, right? So, the idea of like now it's huge and all these people who are now making so much more money are saying that the movement's over. When really, you would say like probably, 81 to 83 is when it kind of that first wave of punk died, right? So, that's what I wanted to explore. Like, how could you say it's over when it's bigger than it's ever been before? Well, it's not what it was supposed to be. And, we got co-opted just like every other genre or whatever. That's where I think the movie could have really hung its head.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, I'm not saying that that issue about the violence that I agree with it or agree with what they're saying. I think you're right that there's a lot of sort of counter arguments, and I was just thinking about it because I was like, this is wrong, this is bad, and there's no pushback again here against this idea. And yeah, I mean, there are women featured in this film. There's a number of bands in this film that have women in them, including as the front person, like the X-Ray Specs. But the issue of what is sort of the place of women in this scene is not addressed. Maybe that is addressed in that other film that he made. Maybe that was all the material he got related to that was relegated to a separate film. I don't know. But just even that interview, like in the back of the cab, where, like I said, there's this woman sitting there, and I don't know, is she also a musician? Is she just this guy's girlfriend? Is she just some random person? And whoever she is, he never lets her talk. And, I think that especially if she's like a bandmate or a fellow musician, that's an interesting dynamic and yeah, nothing. So.
Well, Dave, what do you want to say?
I don't know. Just a bunch of assholes, basically.
Yeah. Right. That was certainly my impression as well. So,
what I really also think could have been cool is in that Miles Copeland interview, he goes, "There's only really two towns with a vibrant scene right now," and he says it's New York and London. And like, well, we know the Ramones had come over to London around this time. What was going on in New York? Like, it would have been really cool if he had gotten to CBGB and we saw Blondie in television and all that stuff. And, but that's a different, I know it's a different,
yeah, that's
London
fine.
Anymore,
it's fine with me to leave that out. That's a whole separate
thing. Well, you're just
a
hater, bro.
No, I enjoy I would have much rather, I like Blondie, I like the Ramones. I think that was more the stuff that I like. But I mean, to me, the movie's called Punk in London. He's already traveled from Germany to London, clearly with, $3 or whatever. So it didn't.
I mean, we don't know that. He could have had plenty of money. You're just assuming that the failure was based on that. It could have been based on just poor, execution of the movie.
Right. I think it's probably both, but you're right. We don't know. But I was fine with the fact that it didn't also travel to New York. Like it's okay. You watch Decline of Western Civilization, which is about the LA punk scene. It's okay that they're not going to New York or to London or whatever. It's about this scene in this place. And that's what this movie is too. I think that's fine. It just doesn't do a good job of depicting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying they needed to. I'm just saying it would have been cool if they did, Josh.
Yeah. So, no, I'm all for seeing Blondie and the Ramones perform.
Stop persecuting me like a teddy boy, Josh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you want to rate this out of 5 teddy boys?
Or 5 1 2 3 4s?
That's confusing.
So I gave it 2.5, mostly for the Clash performance at the end. So because it's not a great documentary, but there are other great punk rock movies. So you can watch this and then go watch a better one.
Yeah, or just watch the better one and don't watch this. I give it a 2 out of 5. I think your extra half star comes from your love for the music.
Clash,
yeah, which I don't have. As a documentary, no. So Dave, how do you rate this?
I gave it 3, which is very much overrating it. But the thing is I just, I didn't dislike watching it. I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the performances, and I laughed at these idiots. So, I had an all right time.
Dave, how did you feel these attitudes compared to your attitude when you were a white rapper in the early 2000s there?
Yeah, if somebody was filming us, we probably would have said some shitty stuff too. So,
Thank goodness no one did that.
Yeah.
We'll come back and talk about the legacy of punk in London. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our 20th retrospective season, we're talking about 1977 documentary Punk in London. And as we said, the immediate sort of legacy of this film was this German filmmaker, Wolfgang Büld, making multiple other films about the underground music scene in the UK. We mentioned Punk in England, aka Punk and its Aftershocks in 1980, and Women in Rock in that year as well. Before that, between these, he also made a reggae documentary called Reggae in Babylon in 1978. So he was really, really immersed in this scene for a certain period of time. And his later career, as far as I can tell, featuring many movies that are not known or available here in the US, not he shifted from punk rock documentaries to what look like kind of softcore-ish exploitation B movies. So real interesting career for this guy, and has still, I think his last movie was just a few years ago, another kind of B movie exploitation thing. So still working. Maybe, maybe he could go back and do a punk, 50 years later kind of documentary. That might be interesting if he has learned something about filmmaking in the interim period.
I mean, he keeps working. He's a working filmmaker. Right. So, Josh, I'm going to recommend some other punk documentaries. I already told you my favorite is Punk Attitude, Don Letts. But, Joe Strummer, The Future is Unwritten is a great one. I think the Ramones, the end of the century is a great one. So I would say do some of that. The Kathleen Hanna Riot Girl one is really good. The Pussy Riot one is really good. The Go-Go's one is good. There's plenty of great ones. You already mentioned, like I said, Decline of Western Civilization. There's a movie I haven't seen from 2012 called Punk in Africa. That sounds pretty cool. I'll probably just keep watching Clash documentaries, though.
That's fair. Yeah, I certainly recommend The Decline of Western Civilization. The first one, of course, is about that early punk scene. There are 3 of them. My favorite, as we're talking about, how this doesn't line up with my taste. My favorite is The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, which is about the 80s hair metal scene, that's the music that I like more than this music. But then Decline Part 3 returns to this underground punk scene in the 90s, I believe, or even maybe it was in the early 2000s, but this sort of like much later generation of punks who 1998 is when it was, and there are a lot of them kind of living on the streets and stuff like that, and so that gets back into that real underground spirit, I think. So if you're into the punk music and not so much into the hair metal, you can watch Part 1 and Part 3 and skip Part 2 and check those out. I haven't seen nearly as many of these, Jason, as you have. A Band Called Death is a good one.
Yeah, that one's great. I was going to mention that. The Kathleen Hanna one's called The Punk Singer. There's the other F word about punkers who become fathers. That's kind of a fun idea. So, yeah, there's plenty of them out there. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is that for me, I think, and we've talked about this probably when we've covered other music documentaries, something like A Band Called Death, where it's about like discovering this interesting story about forgotten people and what has happened to them, is to me way more engaging as a film than just a documentary that's like, here's some music being performed and maybe some people talking about performing that music. And that's just my preference. We talked about like Stop Making Sense, for example, and even that is considered like the greatest concert movie of all time, but I'm like, it's just a concert. So that's my sort of personal interest. And I don't remember anything about A Band Called Death's actual music because it was like sort of secondary to what made the movie interesting.
I mean, I think you would like The Punk Singer, the Kathleen Hanna one. New York Doll about Arthur Killer Kane is incredible. It's a good documentary, very sad. Jim Jarmusch did Gimme Danger, The Stooges doc. So, there's a really great subgenre of punk documentaries that are worth watching. If you wanted to watch more of the performance ones, White Riot, which is, a Clash based documentary with some other ones, would be a good place to probably start.
Yeah, way more there than I would ever have been familiar with. So
I'd throw A Music War in there as the concert-based ones. That one's awesome.
Okay, I haven't seen that. I do want to. I will put that on my list. The other one I want to see is Salad Days, which is all about the Washington D.C. punk scene.
So we said sort of the biggest bands from this film, the ones that went on to have the most successful careers, The Clash, The Jam, the Boomtown Rats are still around. Recently put out an album in 2020. I feel like, Jason, am I wrong? Or those are the sort of the biggest names that are in this film?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Sex Pistols, who are not in the
Well, they're
film,
not in the
but
film,
yeah,
yeah.
the Jam, really cool stuff. That's entertainment. The Town Called Malice, the Clash. It's been documented. My second favorite band, Josh.
Yes.
And the Stranglers were big. So that's coming from our American point of view. I can't say. I mean, we know the Clash and the Sex Pistols transcended countries, but I can't say if any of them were bigger over there than those two that didn't make it over here.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of the other bands, a lot of these, you look them up and it's like, band existed from 1976 to 1978, very
That's punk
short-lived.
music, man.
Right. So like the Adverts, the Jolt, the Killjoys, Subway Sect, all of those bands had the very, very, very short careers. Although a couple members of the Killjoys went on to found Dexy's Midnight Runners.
Yeah,
who,
we talk about that in an interview that I'll plug coming up very soon, Josh.
All right.
I wanted to ask you one
Yeah.
other question. What about narrative movies? Like for me, Sid and Nancy is great. I love 24-Hour Party People, which really kind of moves from this end into first wave or new wave stuff. So do you have any punk narratives that you like?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this per se, so I am probably going to forget something. I do like 24-Hour Party People a lot. I don't know that I would have thought of that specifically as a movie about punk, but it's a great movie. And Sid and Nancy, I remember being sort of mixed about. Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains is an interesting film. It kind of starts out really strongly and then gets a bit I don't know. It loses its way a bit, but is a great early performance from Diane Lane too. So that's the only one that like kind of I can think of off the top of my head. But
Well,
definitely,
I know you really liked We Are the Best Scandinavian.
I do. Yeah, you know what? See, you remember better than I do. I'm like trying to scan through lists here to remember what I've seen. We Are the Best is fantastic. We Are the Best is fantastic, and Rock and Roll High School, if that counts, with the Ramones. Love Rock and Roll High School.
Yeah, I think that counts. And, again, 24-Hour Party People really moves into that first wave. So if we're going to go into there, then I can connect that to Sing Street, John Carney, who we've talked about on the show once, which is an amazing movie also. So
right,
I would
know
say
you
those.
love Sing Street.
I do. Dave, any picks?
I can't think of any that are like real life punk stories. I mean, I would just put like Green Room as, a great
Awesome.
punk rock
Yeah,
movie.
that's a good pick.
So throw that in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the ones that I mentioned, those are all fictional.
Yeah.
We Are the Best and The Fabulous Stains and Rock and Roll High School, not based on a true story, shockingly. So, I mean, in terms of the bands here, I just wanted to say I was sort of surprised to note that the lurkers of all of these sort of lesser known bands are the ones that had continued career. Like they still tour. They put out an album in 2020, and they're one of these bands that has had so many lineup changes that for a long period, there were two competing versions of the band with different people in them. That, speaking of hair metal, that's a fairly common thing in that scene. But for a while, that existed. And because I was wondering, like the guy they interview in this movie, who they don't identify except saying that he's the bass player. And so I went to Wikipedia, like, who is the bass player of the Lurkers? And it's like, here are a number of ones to choose from, depending on like which month this interview might have been recorded in. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, that type of thing happens, man. Like, New Order, which came out of Joy Division, they still tour, but Peter Hook is doing his own thing, and they're still kind of, they're both having huge success. If you want to know about real just kind of fuckery, shall we say, the way the Clash's lineup changed over the years and the way the manager kind of weaved his way into the band and like firing members so he could be on stage. Like that's interesting and tragic at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a common these scenes, then, people lose what made the band special. And, there's like one, the bassist who was in the band for 2 years gets rights to the name. And suddenly that's the official version of the band. And they're recording albums and they're touring. And again, hair metal is full of this, but punk too, apparently so. But if you want to see the Lurkers, some guys calling themselves the Lurkers are still around touring and putting out albums. And the X-Ray Specs, I feel like, again, they like all those other bands, didn't last for very long, but they had reunited occasionally, and they seem to me to be very influential. I don't know if that's correct.
Well, Josh.
Yes.
That's all I got.
Okay. I thought maybe you, Dave, do you have any thoughts on?
I mean, it's great.
What's the most influential sort of lesser known band here? Is there anything? Any of these bands influence your music, Dave?
Not yet, but I mean, I'm going to go get myself a saxophone so I could be like X-Ray Specs. So.
Right. There you
go. I love that.
Something.
That's what I mean. But that's what I'm talking about. Like, the idea of like anything goes, punk, reggae, ska. We know that they have real relations. So it's kind of cool when you get a band that's playing a little outside of the box like that.
Yeah. So Jason, as you mentioned, we've got a special bonus coming up in a couple days, an interview that you did related to this film. What was that all about?
Yeah, Josh, I feel like of this genre, of the three of us, I would be the expert, but I know there are people who have way more of a history and are much more expertise in the genre than I do. So I wanted to interview two great guys in Las Vegas who met via the punk scene and formed a lasting romance via the punk scene, which is really cool. Skip King, who has been to over 2,000 punk shows since the 70s, and ML Compton, who managed punk bands like the Zeros. So they were really like kind of West Coast LA punk immersed in that scene. But they did get to England around 79, 80, and we talked about kind of, if this movie was representative of what the scene was like then and kind of how they felt about this movie, what was real, what didn't work, things like that. And the tolerance issue, which I think is interesting, given their sexuality and everything. So it's a really interesting interview. These guys know more about punk than all three of us combined will ever know. So they're both just kind of encyclopedic in their knowledge. And I think it's a really fascinating interview, and I hope you guys give it a listen.
Yeah, so check that out. That will be up later this week on our main feed. So if you want some more punk info and insight, certainly, as Jason said, more than Dave and I have, at least.
Mm-hmm. Much more than I have. It's fun for me to talk to these guys. I know them socially because of we're all foodies and stuff. So when I have music conversations, I feel like I know a good amount about music. I've written about music professionally for over a decade, but I always learn something from these guys. So it's really fun for me.
Yeah, and that'll be fun for listeners too, I think. So check that out. And that is Punk in London, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can count us off online and on social media.
Right, find us on their socials, you will. Right. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the things. Go for Jason on Letterboxd. I got a residency at Jimmy Kimmel's Comedy Club. It's punk rock. It's 11:30 p.m. We only start and play late. We play the hits. We play the lesser known stuff. You got to come see it. Look for me. Just message me on Instagram if you want to come to a show, and I'll tell you where to get tickets. Not CompuN, because I got to make money. Unlike some of these punk bands who made no money. We're at awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Instagram and Facebook. Awesome Movie Pod on the most intolerant of platforms. So if you want to find us there, go for it.
Yeah, there's people are still on there for various reasons. So you can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky, and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this film or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think. And check out our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
You can find Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And if you want to find some original pressings of some of these punk records, 45s, all that kind of stuff, come down to Wax Trax Records here in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And Jason,
you like punk music, you kids? Come down to Rick's Rax Records, the punk music pink house on Decatur Boulevard.
He wears a Misfits shirt like every day, pretty much.
If you're a teddy boy, we got stuff for you too.
Thank you. I love that somehow our listeners are going to get this sense of Rich Rosen here. None of them know who that is, but the impression comes up more often than the most famous people that Jason has ever done an impression of. So check out the interview that we have this week. But then, Jason, what is going to be in our next episode?
Josh, it's Dave's pick, and as you know, I'm nothing but a gentleman. So, Dave, why don't you tell us?
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I went with one that I've actually never seen and I've always wanted to. It's Bad Lieutenant from 1992.
So tune in next week for Bad Lieutenant.
It's kind of a punk rock movie, right?
Yeah, why not? And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Right!